I would like to introduce to you Ms. Ann Dunmire. And the title of the session is Toss the Cookie Cutter, Identify a Testable Question. Ann,
Thanks, Greg.
yeah, there you go, Ann, go for
it. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming today. We're going to talk about how to identify a testable question and develop a line of inquiry for younger students. It can be useful for older kids who maybe don't have as much experience in that area, but I noticed that at Reach with our 4th through 6th graders who are competing in the science fair, it's hard for them to avoid those questions that they know what will happen at the end. So we're going to talk about how to develop that line of inquiry and build testable questions. There we go. So what is a testable question? A testable question is always about just changing one thing, a variable, to see what the effect is on another thing. So you're looking at your independent and your dependent variables and wanting that really clearly written in your question. And so the independent variable is the part that you're going to change, so the part that the student has control over. And then the dependent variable is what they're going to measure, and just making sure that each question has the two components, so you're not doing like anything subjective. It needs to be something that you can answer through experimentation. But before, not too far. Thanks. Before you can get there, you need to develop a line of inquiry. So getting kids to come up with questions on their own can be kind of a challenge, and that's really where we're going to focus our time today. So developing a line of inquiry, you're always going to start with just being curious. And as teachers, as parents, we want to encourage our students and children to explore with wonder and ask a lot of questions. And I know as a parent, it's sometimes hard when your kid's asking why all the time to continue to give them answers. But instead of answers, ask them more questions back, right? So if they're asking you a why question, ask them a clarifying question. Well, what do you think controls that? Or, well, why is the sky blue? What do you think could make the sky blue? What other color could it be? Or what could be some things that control the color of the sky? Or any kind of question that comes to your head to get them thinking instead of shutting down their inquiry. So from a young age, wanting to ask more questions instead of, because, right? Instead of giving an answer, asking more questions so they're still thinking. And with students in class, anytime that they're stuck on something, so you're looking at, they're having trouble with a concept, or they're stuck on an idea, instead of giving the answer, you're asking that question to get them thinking more deeply about a topic, right? So if a kid says, well, I don't understand this, how do I get it? How do I figure this out? Don't tell them how to do it. Ask them a question that gets them thinking in the right direction. So you're kind of guiding them like bumpers in bowling, right? So you want them to go down the lane, but you're not pushing them down the lane. They ask you a question and you're kind of bumping them in the right direction with more questions. And so once they get thinking about things that they're interested in, specifically when you're looking at science projects, you want it to be a real world problem. So looking at things in nature, looking at things with climate justice, looking at things with household chores, anything that they're involved with, that they're frustrated about in the world, or wondering about, or curious about, asking those questions to get them thinking about what they're interested in. You don't want them working on a project that isn't something they want to do. Then you're doing all the work pushing, right? So you want them to be excited. So finding what works for a kid and then really getting them excited about it. And then enable them to research existing answers. So conducting background research, and then making it measurable would be making sure that it's defined, measurable, and controllable. And so we'll get a little deeper into that as we continue to move through. So inquire, when we look at the NGSS inquiry model, we want to engage students in seeking answers to their own questions through investigation. So not a question that you're asking, not a question that's in a book, not a question that's on the internet, but something they want to know. And then being able to empower them to have the tools, or give them the tools so that they can answer it themselves through investigation. Whether that means you're finding them a mentor, or pairing them with an expert in the community, or a teacher at school, but being able to give them the opportunity to ask and be excited about it, and then move in that direction. And so for teachers out there, we know that we're giving them those phenomena to inquire about. And we want to see that both in school and at home, to develop that curious mind in our little scientists, or big scientists. So a favorite quote of mine that has to do with inquiry would be from Isaac Asimov. So looking at how just that subtle thought that's wrong, like something like, huh, even though your first idea about something might be wrong, it can give you it gives rise to fruitful inquiry that can establish truths of great value. If you didn't have that wrong thought that got you thinking about questions, you would never come to that answer. So if you look at any like successful inventor or scientist, their first answer probably wasn't right. And so they had to do research and they had to ask more questions and do investigation to get where they were going to be, to find anything of value. And so we want to encourage our kids to be in line with inquiry. And so, like I had said at the beginning, just beginning with curiosity. And we know that the younger kids are, the more questions they're asking. And the older they get, they do tend to stop asking questions. And it generally is because we give them the answers or we shut it down. And so we want to support that. How do we continue to develop curiosity? And in kids in 4th through 6th grade, by that time, most of them have kind of shut down on a lot of like, well, why do you think this? And how would that work? Because they've been given the answers or told like, well, I don't have time for that. And so we want to make sure that we're, oh, well, geez, that's a great question, and ask them more questions, get them excited. So how can you do that at home if they've already either lost that curiosity, or if they're young and you want to continue to develop that? Thinking aloud is really powerful. Modeling how to ask questions or questions that they could ask. So when you're walking through your classroom, ask questions and develop, oh, geez, I'm not sure how this project's going to turn out. I wonder if it's this, or how do you think this variable affects that outcome? And not giving them the answer so that they're having to think of the questions. Just modeling that even in the home. Just continue to ask questions out loud. So stuff that seems mundane, turn it into a question. And then let your kid lead. If it's your student, have them follow a line of questioning that they're into. So if they say, well, hey, I noticed this with my, my catapult. I don't understand this component. Ask another question and follow them down that rabbit hole and just keep going with the questions. If you run out of time, meet up at recess, talk after school. And reward their curiosity. You don't want to shut them down with, well, you know what, it's time for this. I don't have time for that. But maybe put a pin in it. Hey, you know what? I'm running out of time. Let me put a pin in this. We're going to write it down and we'll come back and we can spend more time on it later. Honor that curiosity and make room for it. I'm going to plug my computer back in because the battery is deciding to run away with me. We want to follow up questions with more questions, like I said at the beginning. Got it. Sorry about that. All right. So anytime you're getting a question, just bump them back down the alley, right? Don't give them the answer. And then provide positive feedback. So make it exciting and be excited with them, especially in the classroom when you're doing projects or at home. And then really kind of dig deep. So if they ask a question and you're asking a follow-up question, see how curious you can become in their line of inquiry. They'll feel so valued and they'll take ownership of that learning. Sorry, Greg. There we go. So the next, sorry. The next component is going to be researching existing answers. So once you kind of get into that line where, okay, we're really excited about cleaning plastic out of the ocean, or we're really excited about, I had a student talk to me this week about cleaning his dog faster, right? So once you have an idea where this is something they're excited about, do research and conduct comprehensive research into that existing solution. What already has been done? Because if you're doing an experiment on a variable that's already been tested, you're not going to get a unique outcome. So to do your background research, you want to choose relevant sources. How recently was an article published can be really important when you're looking at anything to do with tech or climate. Make sure you're getting the full article, not an abstract. So you want to have all the details and really know the whole story. And look for primary sources if you can. And make sure they're credible. When you're looking at credible sources, we're talking about .org, .gov, .edu, because anything .com is selling, it's commercial, right? So you could use it as an idea, a jumping off point, but you don't want to use that as your main source for any kind of citation. Because if they're selling you something, there's probably an angle, right? So you really want a neutral source that's done comprehensive research, that's not trying to sell you something. And then use multiple sources to compare. After you've done significant research, and leave time for it. It shouldn't be like a weekend, right? You really want to dig deep and find all the possible answers and organize them so that you can reflect on it. Okay, so we were really excited about getting plastic out of the ocean. What are people already doing? What exists now? Organize all of those ideas together and reflect on it and ask more questions. So they're just thinking, oh, well, you know, I know this guy has a boat with a net and it's run this way. I wonder how they can do it without gas power in the middle of the ocean so that we're not having to deliver gas out to the ocean in case there's a leak, right? Oh, this guy's doing it with solar power. Is there a way to make sure that they don't run out if there's a storm, or whatever it is? So asking deeper questions after they look at what's already existing, and then looking at what would be your next step based on what you know. How would you make it different? What variable would you change to get a new and different outcome? What do you want to improve on what you read? And then we need to make it measurable. It needs to be defined, measurable, and controllable. In order to get to that kind of a question, like we said, you need to ask a lot of questions to start with. So after you've done your research and you've reflected and you're going down, okay, these are all the possible solutions I can think of. Ask any question that you can come up with in that line, right? Lead your students through that. Guide them into asking their own questions. Try to stay away from giving answers, and then list all the questions they come up with, like a brainstorm. That way they can go back to it later if they find that they go down a more specific question that doesn't take them where they wanted to be. So keep all those questions. Then you want to break it down. Make sure when you're looking at those questions that it's something that they can answer either through direct observation or gathering evidence, because it does have to be measurable. If they can't prove it by testing it, then it's not going to be a testable question. You don't want a binary question like a yes or no. Is it this? Yes. It needs to be, how does X affect Y, right? When you're pulling it apart and you're looking at clarifying that question, break big, broad questions into smaller pieces, like you cut up a Thanksgiving turkey, right? You choke if you take the whole thing on. If there's too many variables, you're not going to be able to test it. So you really need to narrow it down to just one independent variable to be able to investigate and get good results. And then watch your wording. Make sure that it's something that you can answer through experimentation and that each variable is clearly defined. So some question starters that you could look at might be, how does changing this independent variable affect this dependent variable? How does changing the amount of water in my potted plant affect the yellowness of the leaves, right? Something I can measure, something I can control. Now, can I control the amount of sunlight? If they all get the same amount of sunlight, then there's my control for my test. You want to make sure there's only one independent variable that you're changing. And, what's the effect of X on Y? There's lots of great question stems, and I know in the next session, I think Carrie's going to dive a little deeper into practicing those questions. So if you're curious beyond a couple question starters, go ahead and jump in there. So what we really want to avoid is the cookie cutters. When I say a cookie cutter, I mean that it comes out the same every time. If you have a recipe and you go and cook in the kitchen and it's the same every time, that's not going to be a good science project. So that's going to be anything that you find on the internet. Where did I go? So don't go on Pinterest and be like, oh, we're going to do this super cute gummy bear experiment where we soak them in water. We've seen it a lot of times. So if they come to our district or our district fair at Reach, and we've seen the same project and the kids have the same outcome, no matter how cute their board is or how great their writing is, unless it has a unique answer, it's not going to be worth sending to county. And then they're not going to be able to have a, how do you put it, a competitive stance. If it's a result that we've already seen, it's not unique. You want to make sure that it's something that your kid's excited about so they can clearly explain it. I apologize for my dog. There's wind outside. Um, so make sure that it's something unique to your child that they're excited about. So when they're presenting, they're not only clear on why they did it and what it's about, but there's some passion there so that it's exciting for the judges, it's exciting for the student. And even though making slime is fun, we've seen a lot of projects with slime. So unless you're doing something really interesting, stay away from it. It has a recipe. You can plan it out for a fun activity on the weekend, but there's not a lot of research into slime because it's a recipe, right? So avoid that. There we go. Not too far. There we go. You want to make sure that you support your child or student in identifying all the possible solutions to real-world problems that they're really interested in. Volcanoes are neat, but we know what's going to happen, and it doesn't really solve any real-world problems or questions, right? I don't know when mixing baking soda and vinegar has been helpful in the real world other than maybe cleaning your garbage disposal. So if they want to go down that rabbit hole, cool, follow them. See what you can come up with that's unique and has never been answered before. But you want to skip any project where you know the result before you conduct the experiment. I know that when I make my chocolate chip cookies, they're going to come out the same every time. So it's not an experiment, even though it's fun and I'm mixing things. So looking at bringing all the pieces together, we want to make sure that to get a quality, testable question, that you're starting with curiosity that pertains to your student or child. And follow them in that line of inquiry and get them excited and ask lots of questions. You're going to conduct a lot of background research. Make sure that you have credible sources. Make it measurable so that you can define your variables and you're making it measurable and controllable. When they have lots of questions, encourage that, document it, break it down into smaller pieces, conduct your research. And make sure the wording is clear. If it's not clear, we're not going to know if the experiment is really investigating that question, right? You want it to be something that is very clear that this is my question, here's my hypothesis, here's my test. It all needs to go together. It's not too broad and it's not subjective. It's not binary. You want it to not be a yes or no. It can't be, how do you feel about? Feelings are not observable and measurable in a way that necessarily is quantifiable unless you're working with an expert in perhaps psychology. Uh-oh, I'm stuck. Greg, can you forward me to the next slide, please? No?
I don't think I have control of your slides. Did you get it?
Yeah, thank you. We want to make sure we're encouraging an original line of inquiry. It encourages your child to own their learning, right? And ultimately, that's the goal. Whether they compete at the county or state level, students benefit when they have ownership over their learning. They feel empowered in their lives going forward to continue to follow their own questioning, right? They're going to be able to be better problem solvers, better critical thinkers. They'll learn in a global literate environment. Imagine the kind of jobs they'd excel at if they're able to solve problems on their own, right? So you really want them to feel empowered and curious and able to solve any question that they come up with or any problem that they're presented with. They're going to be able to ask the right questions to figure out a solution. And that's really the goal. So making sure that their questions are defined, measurable, controlled helps them get meaningful outcomes so that they can go on to continue to succeed, not only in science, but in their lives. And thank you for coming.